Hey everybody, Brett from AstartesGaming here, back with another episode of our Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord developer blog videos. So today we're checking out the developer blog for January 18th, 2018. It's our second blog of the new year, and we're getting a Q&A with Steve Negus this time, who, I don't remember what he does. Let's find out. Anyways, let's see. Greetings, Warriors of Calradia. Mountain Blade is an RPG strategy. Wait. No. Let's start that over. Got it. Mountain Blade is RPG, strategy, epic battles, and it's also a unique world which acts as the perfect framework for your own adventures and heroic deeds. Definitely, yeah. I mean, that's why it's so popular. Not because of... I mean, it's a good game in its own right, but the mods... the just openness for mods and, open world play and creating your own story, I think, is what really endeared this game to a lot of people and has kept it going for so long. Anyways, Calradia, the content where Mountain Blade takes place, is a low fantasy setting deeply rooted in history. Its past and factions are inspired by real kingdoms and conflicts of old, but it also adds its own doses of imagination. It's a delicate balance. You have to combine creativity and imagination with thorough research and interpretation of historical sources. The result, however, is worth all the efforts. Calradia may be a fictional place, but it feels as alive and real as our world. It takes a lot of talent and hard work to create such a place, and today we want to introduce you to a member of our team who plays an essential role in its creation, our writer and designer, Steve Negus. So he's actually from Riverside, California, which isn't that far, relatively speaking, from where I'm at. He's been with the team since 2007, and his education is in political science. His main professional experience is via journalism, working in Egypt, Iraq, and other Arab countries. And he is a writer and designer for the team, as we mentioned. So how did he get involved with Bannerlord? That is, or with Tailworlds? That's an interesting question, actually, because obviously coming from the US to a company in Turkey, via journalism in Egypt, Iraq, and the Middle East at large. So anyways, in Iraq in 2006, where you couldn't go out except with a lot of precautions, I had a fair amount of time on my hands after work. I did a mod about the wars for Sicily in the 11th century. I assume he means for Warband, or maybe for the original Mountain Blade. I'm trying to think. If he joined in 2007, it means he was modding probably a good time before then. So I would think probably the original Mountain Blade if he joined them in 2007, because I think Warband came out in, I don't remember my exact dates, but I would say probably the original Mountain Blade if he joined them in 2007. Anyways, I wanted to experiment with dynamic low-intensity warfare like raids and patrols. Armagon called me out of the blue and asked me to work for Tailworlds. Game design has been a passion of mine ever since I was a little kid playing hex and dice war games. If a genie had given me a wish in 1978 about what I wished the future could provide, I probably would have wished for something like Mountain Blade. I loved being a journalist, but eventually that became more difficult, and with a family more difficult with a family and with my wife pursuing a career in academia. So working on Bannerlord is really kind of a dream come true. There's a fair amount of overlap between journalism and game design. Many of the conflicts I've covered resemble medieval wars in that there's no chain of command that everyone follows. Baron and insurgent chiefs have 1,000 believable excuses for not showing up at a muster point for a big offensive if they don't want to. If they do show, it's probably because they want to further their reputation and improve their position vis-a-vis each other as much as they want to defeat the enemy. Mao's dictum that politics come out of the barrel of a gun is well known, but out of its context doesn't say much. Politics is very often the art of cajoling, pressuring, or inspiring people to point their gun in the direction that you want. In a feudal or tribal society, this is doubly so. So he was covering, it sounds like the war in Iraq as a journalist, and decided that that was kind of a difficult job to keep while, having a family, I imagine. It's probably a very dangerous job, too. Well, I mean, it's obviously a dangerous job. So he was making mods while doing so and got a call from Tailworlds to become a developer. Interesting. Kind of an interesting story there, actually. So what does he like most about Bannerlord? I love the low fantasy medieval setting. I love reading history, but I don't have that much of an interest in simulating a specific historical event. It's fun to read history looking for personalities or organizations that can fit into the Mount and Blade world in some way. I like the mix of role-playing game and strategy. RPGs really drag you in. You can wade into the landscape, the towns, the villages, and of course the battles. But most RPGs are variations on a simple theme. Evil person does an evil thing and is punished for it. The hero may have some painful choices along the way about what collateral damage he or she does, but in the end, fiction and fantasy often seem like a morality fable. Even in Game of Thrones, where goodness is punished and evil rewarded, there's still an author making a choice. It's one of the deepest human contradictions that we want to live in a world where a happy ending is guaranteed, but we also want our free will to matter. I think morality matters. It's a kind of force multiplier, to use the military expression, in politics and war. If a leader can pull off being good, which isn't easy, it helps but does not guarantee anything. You can try to be one of those leaders remembered as both virtuous and wise, like Pericles or Marcus Aurelius, and still have your efforts brought to naught by fortune. In Bannerlord, there are about 5 types of morality that you can try to hew to. Reciprocal loyalty to friends and kin, sticking to your word, courage and willingness to sacrifice for a cause, compassion toward those who suffer, and long-term utilitarian calculation. And they'll sometimes be in conflict. I think games can offer some unique perspectives on history, not simulating events or predicting new events, but simply highlighting variables. And I hope this is what we can do. Okay, well, he sounds like a writer, all right. That's a lot of philosophy into why he enjoys RPGs. So, what does he do during his day? He's working from California, not Turkey, so his day is less structured than much of the rest of the team. He consults with Armagon twice a week and then writes dialogues, code, or development documents as the need arises. So he's not just writing like script and stuff, he's actually writing code too, which is interesting. Okay, and it's also interesting that he's working remotely from California. I imagine that's difficult because the time zones would be way, way different. Anyways, what is the most difficult thing that he's solved so far? The game is not out, and I don't know if we've solved this problem, but one of the biggest challenges is to have events that are generated by dynamic sandbox events and are good strategies for the NPCs to adopt, but that also make sense to the player. An example of what we want to avoid from Warband. We introduced feasts, which were a way that factions could spend resources to repair relations between lords that were damaged by the ebb and flow of war. The problem, though, was that the strategically ideal time to hold a feast was when you were in the middle of war, which didn't seem right from a narrative perspective. Yes, you could tell King Harlos that. So there are a lot of moving parts in the game, and we're trying to get them to work together in a way that makes sense from both a strategy and RPG perspective. So what he's saying there is, basically from the AI's point of view, feasts are there for the kings to repair their relations with the lords, after, handing out territory to other people, fighting in wars and whatnot. And so the most ideal time from a AI's point of view to have a feast is during the war, because that's when the relations and stuff take the most hits. So it's trying to basically immediately counteract that by throwing feasts, and that's why you have the Swadians in native constantly holding feasts during wars, because they're at war with so many other factions that they're constantly taking morale hits and relationship hits and stuff. And so the AI's only recourse is to just keep having feasts, which kind of puts them in a death spiral, because then they're always feasting and never defending. And so it's kind of a difficult situation to deal with, but obviously they're working hard to remedy that. So what's he currently working on? I'm currently working on dialogues for quests. This can get quite complicated because we want to have lots of small quests that offer meaningful branching choices, but may also be given out by characters with different personalities. Excuse me. So what he's trying to say there is, depending on who gives you the quest, it can have very different kind of connotation as to what you're actually doing. And so they want to have quests that can come from multiple sources but still feel organic. And that's difficult to do because you may be getting a quest from a lord who's very honorable versus one that's very dishonorable. And the quest needs to not feel or it needs to feel immersive coming from either one to be, ideal. Whereas, if you have a very honorable lord asking you to do something fairly dishonorable, or dishonorable lord asking you to do something fairly honorable, that's going to be unimmersive and it might, take you out of the game. We're also trying to work out a main storyline quest that absorbs the player but complements the sandbox struggle for power rather than seeming like two parallel games. Interesting, so they're going the Viking conquest route here by adding a little bit of a story to the sandbox. Hopefully it is entirely optional like the Viking conquest one, where you can either jump straight into the sandbox or be led through it a little bit before getting into the sandbox. But I'm definitely cool with that. I didn't really care for the Viking conquest storyline. Not that it was like outright bad or anything. I think there's a lot of people that enjoy it. I just didn't really find it necessary. I don't play Mount & Blade games for that purpose, so I'm not looking for a story to get out of it, but it is an interesting addition for those who maybe found the jump straight into the sandbox a little bit overwhelming at times. So that's cool to know. What faction does he like the most? Excuse me, I'm getting all congested as I'm talking here. Anyways, aesthetically, I love the Aserai, the cities and the deserts. That's partially why I chose to live in the Middle East. But I'm actually most excited about the Empire. It's based on the Byzantines, but for its politics, we've drawn a lot from the classical political legacy. So, well, I guess I won't explain it because he's about to. The Greeks and the Romans didn't really have ideologies, but they recognized certain styles or postures that leaders could strike. So there wasn't like Democrats and Republicans, like liberals and conservatives. Populist Democrats had a passion for justice, but could easily fall into the mob groupthink. Oligarchs brought experience and stability, but tended to confuse their class interests with those of the state. And monarchs brought a certain unity of purpose to a city-state, but tended to be arbitrary and tyrannical. These weren't fixed, and leaders could switch or mix stances as the need arose. If only they could do that today. Now everybody's very, very fixed in their positions, and you get the bipartisan mess like we have in the United States. Today, most people believe in elections and the universal franchise, and are thus what the ancients would probably consider very radical Democrats. But there's a lot of debate about the kind of leaders we want, and I think we'll see the same assumptions and stances, the same trade-off of justice, stability, and unity that the ancients dealt with. Bannerlord is absolutely not going to be an analogy for the present. The characters are all inspired by historical leaders rather than modern ones, but I think you may find the echoes to be interesting. And then we get the last little bit of information here, and this I actually found pretty interesting when I read through this beforehand. And so, whoops, in Warband we concentrate, or let me read the question to you first, how about that? Do companions/heroes have an even more in-depth personal background than in Warband? So we finally get a little bit more information on companion characters. In Warband, we concentrated a lot of the elements of a traditional role-playing game into the companion system. They told you the lore, their preferences forced you to make choices, etc. In Bannerlord, we've spread the role-playing elements around more evenly. There are a lot more potential companions in Bannerlord, and they have backstories, but we want the companion system to feel more open-ended. We want for it to be possible for companions to die, and give the player, say, a motivation to avenge them, or alternatively, for a player to appoint lots of companions to lordships. To that end, we've taken out some of the pre-scripted companion interactions in favor of a more dynamic system. Also, more lords have backstories, and those backstories matter more in how the game unfolds. So this is fantastic news. One of my biggest, I don't know if complaint's the right word, but one thing that always sort of irks me is I always feel like, especially with the way that I do my Warband Let's Plays, as you guys may be familiar if you're following my channel, I take character submissions from you guys in the comments, and I overwrite the companion characters in the mod or whatever to basically become those characters. But in certain mods or in native, there's only a set amount of companions you can have together before you get a bunch of infighting, and then they all want to run away or get pissed off or whatever. In native, for example, I don't remember the exact number, but there's basically two different groups of companions that you can have, or essentially it's like 2 bigger groups and 2 smaller groups, and you get to pick one of each. But there's like a max number that you can have, and it's roughly half. And then the other, you know, half you have to ignore until you get rid of everybody else, or, you know, it really limits it, because you have to choose between the characters, and so you can't really, you know, meet them all at once. Whereas now it seems like they're completely doing away with that, and rather than having these like pre-written dispositions toward each other, it seems like they're going to sort of grow organically, and so they may not initially start out hating one another, but two companions with differing personalities might eventually start butting heads. Or, I don't know, maybe they'll start out butting heads and then eventually grow to respect each other or something. And maybe you'll have a role in how that happens. Because a lot of people, I think, had issues with that previous system, because obviously if you were running an army and 2 people in the army were having issues, you would kind of put that to rest pretty quick. You know, it wouldn't be this like ongoing, well, I mean, it could be like an ongoing thing, but it wouldn't affect the entire army. You know, you would probably deal with it one way or another. And so to have a system that's not only a little bit more engaging but more realistic, I think is definitely an improvement. It's also interesting that the lords have backstories now, whereas before they didn't. You know, they didn't even really have personalities. They would get a personality type randomly generated at the beginning of each campaign you started. And they were weighted in certain ways, so some lords would be honorable more often than not, and some would be dishonorable more often than not. But it was still more or less randomized, as were their relationships to each other and their ages. So you could have lords who are, you know, siblings in one playthrough and then completely unrelated in another. And with this, it seems like we're going to get those set in stone. And so I think the relationships will be a little bit more meaningful, because now you're not just going to have like 2 guys that are randomly brothers, but you'll have maybe a father and a son lord that kind of work closely together, or maybe they are kind of opposed because the son doesn't like the father or something. I don't know. It opens up more potential for storytelling, which I think is great. So anyways, I think we'll leave it here. Let me know what you guys think about this new companion system. I'm always happy to have more companions, again, because it makes it easier for me for Let's Plays. And I just think it's more fun to have companion characters. Although now that they cannot die, I think they aren't going to be nearly as good as they were before. But that's fine, because honestly, I just think it makes it more interesting. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a great time talking about some Bannerlord with you, and I look forward to seeing you guys back here for the next episode.